Hiya. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How's it going? How's your week been?
It's been great. I had a few days off, so that was lovely. Tried new hot pot place, which was amazing.
Did you make you said were you not making a hot pot the other week?
We did. Clearly, we didn't have enough hot pot because then we went out somewhere else to have more hot pot. Um, and after that, we went out for dessert, and there were four of us. And I guess
Oh, sorry.
that's why
Go on.
we ordered so much dessert that the staff of the place where we ordered dessert came out and they took a picture and we were all like, and then she walked off with the phone and we were like confused because we're like, whose phone did she just take? And it turned out it wasn't our phones at all. We were just amused by how much dessert we had ordered that they took a picture of us with the dessert.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Wow.
That is really funny. Oh dear. What have...
level.
Mm,
And how was your week?
Well, what did I do? All right, lots of things. I did a lot of salsa dancing over the last few days. That was it. So I did a lot of salsa dancing, which has been really fun. And then catching up with a few friends. That's about it last week. And looking for stories.
Yes.
Trying to find some more on the positive side of stories, which we struggled with this week, I think.
So, yes, it's been a tough week.
So I've picked this story. It's quite interesting. The headline is Chinese women face a complex homecoming after studying in Australia. Now, there is a lot of Chinese students here.
Yes.
Compared to like the UK. The UK, there's that's not a thing. The students are not from China in the UK. Actually, I'm just thinking in the UK, there must have been a lot of African. That's how my dad ended up in the UK. It's a lot of African students, that population. I wonder what it is now. It's usually a massive, immigration of students from certain countries. And I do wonder. But anyway, Chinese women face a complex homecoming after studying in Australia. And this is about a lady that's not real. This is not her name. Li Fang. That's not her real name. She returned to China after studying at university in both Australia and in New Zealand. And she didn't think she changed. But her family and friends soon noticed. She says, people around me thought I was different. I asked them, what's the difference? And they said, sometimes your opinions and your speaking style are very direct. And then she says here, in hindsight, she agrees. She thinks her personality changed a lot after going abroad. She says, I like freedom. I like independence. And it wasn't just her close family that noticed. She did an internship with the Chinese government. And nobody there had an international background. And she says everyone there is quiet. No one speaks or speaks up about anything. Everyone just follows, she says. So when you come back to China and you're not used to this, people around you think you're strange.
Can I ask you a question?
Sorry,
yeah.
Go.
Do you find Australians to be, quite direct people compared to, well, obviously the UK?
Compared to the UK? No, I think I'd say UK people were more direct. I don't know where they have this. There's this kind of idea that UK are really conservative and not as direct, I guess. Up stiff upper lip, not showing emotions.
Yeah.
Maybe the royal family, yeah, but not general public. I would say they're way more direct. And I miss that. Yeah. And I notice it actually.
Yeah, I would imagine. I think you notice it. And I think I didn't realize until I met our European friends and compared, how direct they were to, Australians who, I guess, compared to the Chinese are direct. But when you look at the scale, I think Australians not really very direct.
I mean, they're not like on the Chinese end, where obviously this lady's talking about how direct the Chinese are not. But compared to Brits, I'd say Brits are way more direct. And Americans are like up there again. You know, Americans are at that end, I'd
Yeah.
say.
Like,
It's interesting, isn't it? Or
yeah,
relative on the
exactly.
scale of directness. But anyway,
Mm.
she finds herself changed after studying in Australia. And some women chart a new course for themselves back in their home country. And now they've consulted an expert, Fran Martin, is an associate professor at the University of Melbourne, who completed a 5-year study where she followed a group of 56 Chinese women who studied at university in Australia, including Lee, the person in the story. So women students make up a majority of the students that come to us from China, Dr. Martin
Women
tells.
students. Oh, that's
Yeah,
surprising.
women. Many of them find meaningful experience in terms of their personal subjective sense of themselves and for their plans in their life as women. They may pivot or reorient as a result of being away from social and familial surveillance at home and living somewhat independently here in Australian cities.
Mm.
But I'd say that's another difference between Australia and UK.
Mm.
When we generally, and I'm speaking being generalizing here,
Mm.
people move away from home, so they're not under the supervision, surveillance of family
Mm.
and the community.
Yeah.
They're completely removed and have to and are free to kind of form their own. I'm going to say form their own personality, but that's evolve the personality without that direct influence.
Mm.
And I think that kind of makes a difference in how you grow as a person. I mean, I'm not saying you can't do it if you don't do that. I'm just
Mm.
saying that's one of the consequences that happens if you do that.
I don't
And
think Australians move much.
don't
I
they
mean,
stay at
I
home?
think Australians and we love to travel. I
Mm.
think that's the thing, but we don't, I think our home base doesn't change very much unless there are obviously people who move to the UK and like to stay in the UK and things
Or
like
move
that.
to different states.
Like 10%.
It's just interesting. I think that opportunity, I don't think it's specific. Obviously, we're talking about these Chinese women that study in Australia being
Mm.
removed from the society.
Mm.
They're in the society, the familial surveillance, as they say here. But it's typical in the UK as well.
Yeah.
Although that's not such a culture difference. It's not really the same because you're moving to another city. You're
Yes.
not moving to the other side of the world and a completely different culture and language. So
Yes.
not
And I
quite the
imagine
same.
the freedom that they notice in Australian society versus in back home in Chinese society would be completely new and
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. She says, there's you participants in this test that she did, a survey, spoke about getting a kind of tolerance or understanding of a non-standard ways of living. So whether or not you do these yourselves, you'll see others do it. From dyeing your hair blue to cohabiting with partners before marriage to not having a standard wife and family life plan. So these are new ideas and values that collide with a more conservative reality back in China.
Yeah.
And they experience this from returning to the family home through broader state and cultural pressures of both. So they graduate thinking, what we're going to do as an adult, and they go back to China and they hear, when are we getting grandchildren?
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh, geez. A line I can sympathize with.
But again, it's international, but a women thing. This is so funny, right? This guy I used to work with, young guy, and he joke about it because he was married. I think it was like a young marriage. Maybe they've been married 5 years or something.
Yeah.
And he said this same thing, constantly when you see our in-laws, I was like, when are you getting, when are you having children, when are you having kids, when are we getting grandchildren? And do you know what he said? He says to them, you can't get pregnant the way we do it.
Oh my gosh.
He
Yeah.
says that totally shuts them up. I was like, I love it. That's so funny. Anyway.
I love it too. I would not try it on my parents.
Yeah. Would you say that? Anyway, sorry, I digress. So there's a bit of a paradox, this student's saying. There's a paradox as you go back to China, because generally Chinese public culture and the parent culture has encouraged them to strongly towards professional careers and a high level of education. But then there is this renewed and intense pressure on women in their mid-20s to reorient suddenly towards marriage, children, and family care. So these women come back with these valuable degrees, but then they're thrown back into this sort of neo-traditional sense of what a woman's role and identity should be as, you know, she's in her 20s. And then the other thing is the competition for professional jobs, which is huge in China because there's, you know, such a large population versus here where we don't have that population density, so it's not as fierce. But yeah, she goes on to say, you know, extended family or family members will say, when are you getting married? When are we getting grandchildren? And actually, I didn't know this, but apparently China are pushing for people to have more children.
Yeah, a lot of the Asian countries are Japan, China, I think Taiwan, the same thing with there's a decrease in their birth rates across the board. So they're doing lots of different kinds of things to try and combat it. So
okay, that's interesting, right? So the pressure that increases the pressure then. You know, there's women that have been educated overseas to have children, get married and have children.
What would you say to someone who's struggling with that though?
What do you mean struggling with what?
What to figure out your, like you were saying in the article, right? I think many women can sympathize with that you're told from an early age that, oh, you should achieve, you know, you need to get a degree and get a job and whatever, and then it suddenly changes to, wait, we don't care about all that much, we care about you know, having
children.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
mum, and like it's weird that people think you can just switch from like
it is
to another, right?
And I just I'm going to digress again. Gets me onto, I had this argument with a guy last week. Oh, let's not call it an argument, let's call it a healthy debate. Right. So just a random guy I met in the pub, and he was really interested in my friend, like romantically, and we were saying to her, oh, give him a chance, you know, kind of be nice, and then me and him were just talking. Now he's showing me, like, telling me what he does for a living, how he earns his money and things, and what was he? I don't know. I'm just trying to remember how we got into this conversation. It was about, he said, on the one hand, he said, oh, I like her. She's really strong. So this, my friend, she's very smart. She's strong and she's driven, professional woman. And she's only in her 20s, not even 30 yet. Like, it's a very impressive lady. And he said, I like her. And then he said, oh, well, that was it. She doesn't need to buy, I don't know if it's about buying drinks or something, or she doesn't need to buy the man should look after the woman or something. And then he was talking, and then I go, so what do you mean? You know, we got talking about that. I was like, do you want a strong and smart woman? Yeah. Or do you want a woman? I'm not saying that the opposite is for women that don't want to work or anything. I'm not saying they're not smart or strong. I'm just saying they're less likely to want to not have a work or a career. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And he's like, oh no, once the man has to, oh, that was it. The man has to be the breadwinner. That's what he said. He has to earn the most. He's like, the man would die. He was like, so like, he would die. This is the kind of words he was using. And I'm just like, what? So we had this massive argument. Oh my God. And then and I'm just like, but I said, it's beautiful. That's how you feel. I wouldn't say you speak for all men, but for yourself, if you're so passionate about, you know, being able to, what's the word? Provide for your family, whether that's your, you know, immediate or extended, brilliant. Good for you. I said, but what if you meet a woman who has the same desire? It's the same drive and wants children, as you clearly do. What then? And he's like, well, she doesn't need to work. I was like, it's not about needing to work. It's about wanting to work. But it's not possible the man to stay at home. And then I was like, well, why not? There is men that would like to do that.
Yeah.
And we're just having this massive argument. And then he's trying to give me evidence. And he was like, you go into childcare. You go into childcare. How many men do you see working there looking after children? This was his argument. I was like, not very many, maybe even none. I don't understand your point, though. You know, we were having this massive debate.
Oh, actually, on a side note, wasn't it the Harry Potter writer? I forgot her name. Anyway,
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling, of course. Didn't she come out like a few months ago saying that she would never allow, as if it's up to her, but she would never allow like a man to like, you know, be a child, you know, an early childhood person, like because they're all just, you know, looking to abuse children or something. It was really random.
Oh, did she say something like that? That's a terrible thing to say, and that's not true.
Exactly.
It's a really bad bias.
Yeah.
It's a terrible bias to have. But anyway, that wasn't even the point he was making.
Yeah.
The point he was trying to make was that it was talking about caring for children, how only women could do it. Is essentially what he was getting at.
Which is crazy.
And I was just like, okay, we need to stop this conversation because we ain't going to agree, and that's okay. But know this, a woman, this is not the woman you're going to marry with your attitude.
Exactly.
This is basically what I was saying. So back to the story.
Back to the story.
All right. Oh, they're talking about there are some conservative voices in China that criticize young women who have studied abroad. And there are stereotypes in some of the online forums saying, well, would you marry a woman who's come back from studying in the West? Or would she be corrupted by the loose sexuality that we see in Western cultures?
Oh my gosh.
It's so interesting though, right? This lady is a master's degree in Melbourne and a PhD in New Zealand. And she's been back in China throughout the whole pandemic. But she doesn't know what she's going to do next. And she says she's lucky because her parents are more open-minded than others. And there are definitely broader societal expectations and pressures around marriage. She says people think a woman should be married at the age of 25 or 26. She's 29. And she says some people may think she's becoming a leftover lady. Oh, I am so left over. I am so left over.
You and me both. Yeah, no, that's tight timeline, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm a leftover lady. And she says returned international students have high requirements for partners. So the women that are going back have high requirements. They want to find a boyfriend who's not only stayed in China, but has also had similar overseas experiences. And she doesn't want to compare women's rights and gender equality in Australia. I don't think it's a good idea to compare to China. She says a lot of Chinese women will often give up their jobs when they get pregnant. Yeah. I remember putting my foot in it. I went to Japan on a work trip, on a business trip, and I was meeting, and the Japanese managers took me for dinner, and I almost had a minder in a good way, like show me around. His English was good, and I can ask him questions, and he worked there professionally, and we went for lunch, and just chatting to him, and asked him what his wife did.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, what did he say? Like I don't know if he said she stays at home or she looks after the kids, but it was because he didn't actually answer me properly. So I was like, so I had to kind of question it and pull it out of him. And then I was like, and then I felt embarrassed because I was like, it was like, oh, right, I didn't mean to, I think I must have asked a question in a way that assumed she had a career.
Yes.
I think I must have had this assumption, and she didn't. She'd stopped working when she had children. But his children were like, I was like, oh, how old are your children? Thinking he had young kids, but they weren't. They were a lot older. And I just really felt like I put my foot in it. But what I noticed there was hardly any women. The only women working in that office, so it must be the thing in Japan, the only thing women working in the office were like secretaries and young.
Yeah.
There were all, whereas it's complete flipped on its head here, where it's mostly women in those roles.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. It's really surreal.
Mm.
Interesting. But anyway, she says what she really noticed in Australia when she was here is
Mm.
around gender was about men. She says in Australia you see many dads having the baby with them.
Mm.
She says,
Yep.
but in China it's still the woman who should bring up the children. It's traditional. The man should earn the money and the women should bring up the children and do everything for the family. And she says, I think it's not that fair, actually. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then she goes on to say one of the biggest challenges is negotiating professional opportunities and expectations.
Mm.
And then there's great competition. And what else does she say? Some returning strategies start to go abroad again for a temporary or more permanent move to find a better life. What else? She says, but some women simply roll over. So you have young, educated, urban, middle-class women. She says, but there is amongst these as women, and there's some popular feminism running through their way of thinking, and they speak to each other. They find ways of thinking and acting differently.
Mm.
But yeah, there's restrictions across Chinese social media, and different opinions about gender are not shut down. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So basically that's interesting because it's not even a societal expectation that's unique to China, is it? I mean, it's a bit more extreme, popular, how we describe it in China.
Mm. No, I don't think so. I think there are lots of similar cultures all over the world.
I just don't understand I'm going to be saying something really controversial here. Why is it so important that you have to have children unless you want to?
Yeah, exactly.
Why do we need to there's enough people in the world.
Mm.
And of course you need a certain population rate for the continuation of mankind.
Yeah.
But every single person does not need to have children.
Well, I mean, from my way of thinking, I reckon you can solve some of the population issues by working together in the world and helping people migrate, from very densely populated places to less densely populated.
Yeah, true. And that tends to happen naturally, but so many countries are like averse to immigration.
Exactly.
Like that's how Brexit happened.
Yeah.
And probably how your lady in Italy got in.
Mm.
So many people are averse to that.
Yeah, exactly. It's really bizarre. But yeah, and sometimes I think if you grow up with that pressure, you can't even tell if you really want kids or if it's
We
just
don't think about it.
yeah.
It's probably just awesome. It's like unconscious. So this is the thing about bias. It can be internal as well.
Yeah.
On yourself. Like you can just not question it because the expectation's always been there. I mean, I've had to ask myself that question about whether I want kids. Do I want kids, or has it been something I've just grown up? It's grown up as a thing.
Yes.
That you must or have to do.
Yeah.
And so by therefore I must have kids. And I've had to question that a lot in the years of whether that's an internal bias that I have for myself or not. But I think there's the other side of that as well about what about the women that can't have children?
Exactly.
It's so much pressure. And it's just such a terrible position to be in. I just think we shouldn't put anybody under that kind of pressure.
Well, and then feeling as if you're a failure or you haven't achieved life's purpose or something, because that marker is so important,
Well, yeah, it's like your identity as a woman is defined by having children.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if the same pressure is for men, right?
Well, probably.
Yeah, to have kids and
yeah. And like at the minute, I'm still flicking left if they don't want children. But I'm gonna have to start
reconsidering
that. I'm going to start reconsidering that. But it's interesting how many young men don't want to have children, actually. I'm seeing on the dating apps.
Yeah, I know.
But I'd say there's more men than women.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. I can't quantify that at all. It's just a feeling. There's more men than women that don't want children.
Well, I think most of the women I've met, I don't think I've ever met anyone who's like 100% I don't want kids or whatever.
I think, well, it's definitely a conditioning.
Yes,
It's definitely a
exactly.
conditioning that we have.
Yeah.
And I actually reminded me of a friend of mine, one of my closest friends, Rani. You met her. You remember you met her online for her
Yeah, I
birthday,
think
yeah?
I did. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
She swore she was one of these people, I'm never having kids, right?
Yes.
Very, very firm in our 20s.
Yes.
Married, 2 kids,
Yeah.
very happy, loves their children to bits.
Yeah.
So very interesting that she's the only person. Oh no, I've met women who said they didn't want children but changed their mind.
So.
Yeah, but it's definitely a pressure people could do without. I'm not even just talking about women,
Yeah,
men as well. But the problem with this is that these women that may want to make different life choices are being pressured to conform to this old idea that they need to stop working.
At least you get to live a little when you're. Oh, I'm making it sound horrible, but yeah, I don't know. Experience something different. At least, but
I just don't see how you can have a taste of that freedom and then go back. But some women obviously do.
well, I guess it's what might be that push and pull of what I need to achieve, right? Degree and whatever. So now I need to get married and have kids.
But some, form of rejection, disapproval, disappointment, because disappointment for some people inside their psyche, disappointing your parents means that has that sense of you're going to be loved less.
Yeah.
That, equals love. And it's something that I just think people maybe question more what they really want.
Yeah.
Outside of, because at the end of the day, it's your life. You've got to live it.
True, but I think maybe some people find it easier just to conform because
some people.
No idea.
It's okay. Are you talking about anybody in particular, Meenal?
No, not at all. Yeah, no.
What could be easier though? Is it really? I think it takes so much energy to go against anything you really want to do.
Yeah, but if you've been doing it forever, then it doesn't take as much. It's like the baseline normal. If you've always really been doing what other people.
Yeah, true. You're right.
So you don't, and it's actually then harder to go the other way, isn't it?
True. Right. But what does that cost you though?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
But I think if you don't have the exposure, you won't know, right? So in that article, the women know because they've been outside of China, they've experienced other things. Whereas there must be so many other women in China who are doing, studying in China, doing all the degrees in China, and then going, yes, I'll happily give up my, my career and everything because now I have to get married and have children. And they don't know any different.
It's just really interesting to see what happens when you take someone out of their culture and society, put them in another one. It's completely different. I'm trying to think of if I've ever felt. Have you ever felt like you've been in that situation, even temporarily?
Like a clash of cultures or something?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Like it's hard not to. Like for any immigrant, I think.
Yeah, I'm just thinking when I went to Africa.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes, because obviously I raised us in this Western world with sin and whatever else it has going on. I remember meeting my brother who'd never met because of my brother from another mother, literally.
No.
And we met for the first time when we were teenagers, and he's asking me why I dressed the way I dressed,
Mm.
which was like a boy,
Oh,
because I would wear like jeans,
yeah.
shorts, and things, which to him was like a boy. And I get why he thought that, because women there wore the traditional clothes, which was generally like kind of like a dress, but not really. Similar to like a sari, but the African version.
Yeah.
So those are some of the questions he had for me. And just, but then even I just remember it to being such a culture shock. But then even the same, similarly, like this in China, women, yes, can be educated, and it was good to be educated, but you were expected to look after the home and look after the have the kids and look after the kids. That this is pretty much, as far as I can tell, it's the same. That was at the time. You were expected to do that. You could work and you could be successful, but at some point you had to stop.
You'd reach your limit.
Yeah, you had to look after the children.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you never had anything similar experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, of course. I think most people with my background, it's the same, actually very mirrored when it comes to the Chinese women and their thing. So it was the same thing. The expectation from when I was younger was, obviously you're going to get a degree. That's like the minimum. An undergraduate degree is a minimum, where possible a master's, which I have to. But anyway, so obviously I was very career focused, uni and working, and I like to work. But of course you reach that 25, whatever. And actually I think for me it was a little bit younger, because I finished uni at like 22 or something. So, and then everybody was like, right, let's get you married. So yeah, it was very, very, it was very difficult, I think. Or not, well, I don't know if it's difficult, but it was quite the different, switch, which I obviously did not manage. Even though
How did you manage it?
Well, I mean, I just never took it seriously, because it wasn't really, I guess, what I wanted. And even when I had like 1,000 dates, I couldn't picture myself married, and all of that. So, and obviously I didn't meet anyone who I thought I could marry. So yeah.
So when you say you didn't picture yourself married, what was your belief about what that would be like?
Well, obviously I have my parents' marriage to compare that to.
But is that what you felt that you would be expected to have? Like, what were you when you said you didn't, your words were, I didn't envision myself. I couldn't vision myself being married. So what was your vision of being married like?
Well, yeah, like it was a little bit, not fun, really. And that it was very restrictive.
In
well,
what
you get
way?
married and then you have kids, and then I just liked having my own, doing my own whatever I wanted to do. So. and being, to be honest, like blatantly honest, I think it was the responsibility of it all. I didn't want, at all, to have to be with someone else and take care of kids and whatever. It was just not at all what I wanted to do. So yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Might just be because, like we don't do that whole independence thing very well in Australia. So maybe it took us longer to grow up. Yes.
Yes.
But yeah, I did get a lot of interesting dates out of it. So
I had lots of stories. You should write a book.
I know, you've told me that so many times. And you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I really should have written some of the stuff down, because I'm forgetting it now. But yeah, just how crazy some of it was. Oh dear.
Okay.
All right. So this story that I've got is from the ABC. It was written on the 21st of September, and the title reads Hawthorne Racism Review to allege that former coaches separated First Nations players from families and demanded a pregnancy termination. To be honest, when I read the title, I did not understand, like those words strung together. I did not understand what it meant. And then I started reading it, and it's horrifying. Like,
Mm.
genuinely, I'm just, it's insane. But anyway, so the article says that the review document has been handed to the Hawthorne senior management 2 weeks ago and is now with the AFL Integrity Unit. But Hawthorne had more than 20 First Nations players in the period of the review, and 3 families involved told the ABC Sport about incidents in which club staff allegedly bullied and removed First Nations players from their homes and relocated them elsewhere, telling them to choose between their careers and their families. I mean,
That's horrendous. And just before moving on, I just think maybe we can explain, like, because AFL is Australian Football League.
oh yes,
So it's the only form of football. It's the only kind of football that's ever played in Australia, as far as I know, because it's not soccer, it's not rugby, but it seems like some sort of cross between the two. It's massive. Obviously, it's Australian Football League. It's massive here. And so it's as, I'd say it's nearly as big as soccer. I don't know if I'd absolutely say that with any certainty, but it's nearly as big as soccer, or what I call football in the UK. It's massive. And so it attracts, like all those sporting things, it attracts young aspiring men and women, but in this instance, men, and they get paid, not all of them, but a handful of them get paid a lot of money. You become a superstar. And then when we talk about First Nations, we're talking about Indigenous Australians who have, I don't know, a predisposition for athleticism in some of these sports, like Black people do as well. Although that's why we're saying, why isn't there Black people swimming? We had that conversation. There should be.
But I think it also makes it difficult for First Nations people, because even though they have this amazing athleticism, it's hard to break in, which makes them maybe particularly more vulnerable to stuff like this, because it's so like, I
totally dream.
Exactly. So yeah. Anyway, the gravest accusation is related to the club's intimidation tactics to separate couples in the early stages of pregnancy and parenthood, and the alleged demand that one player should instruct his partner to terminate a pregnancy. Actions, the family say, created multi-generational trauma. And it actually goes on to talk about, three different, obviously, scenarios. And the first one involves a player by the name of Ian, who, his partner, Amy, had miscarried their first child. So when they fell pregnant again, they were obviously super excited, and they waited the 12 weeks because of, the previous incident. But when he announced it, the club's reaction was immediate, and he says that far from sharing his joy, Ian alleges that a group of coaches, including Alistair Clark's and Chris Fagan, ushered him into an office where he was urged to have the pregnancy terminated, get rid of his partner, and move into the home of an assistant coach. He goes on to say that it was so intimidating and confusing and upsetting. And Clarkson just leaned over me and demanded that I needed to get rid of my unborn child and my partner. And I was then manipulated and convinced to remove my SIM card from my phone, so there was no further contact between my family and me. And they told me I'd be living with one of the other coaches from that night onwards. So he felt that he had no choice. He told me to kill my unborn baby. So I just remember that he could barely get so then he ends up calling Amy, his partner, and telling her, she says he barely could get the words out. He seemed to be crying, and he quickly said that we need to terminate the pregnancy and end the relationship. So, and it goes on to in detail about what Amy went through while they were separated. So they did physically separate them. She didn't have contact with him for months. It wasn't until the baby was born that they actually allowed him, months after that, allowed him to come back home. It just crazy when you think about it. And what's worse is obviously they fell pregnant again within 6 months of having this child. So the pressure then for both of them, and they were very traumatized by this, was, what are we going to do? They knew that the club would completely lose it if they had an idea. And so Amy actually ended up terminating that pregnancy. And she remembers, going to the hospital and her mum actually saying, you don't have to do this, but she felt like she had to do it, so she did. And it's like, she goes on to say that it's something she still hasn't gotten over. So yeah, that's crazy. And there is also another story, obviously, from Zach, who was another First Nations player. But basically, he felt, because I had been drafted against the odds, I felt like I had to do everything right to succeed. But he could never have predicted the types of obstacles he would have to navigate at Hawthorne, nor that he would eventually feel manipulated into choosing his career over his family. Together for years by then, Zach and his partner Kylie were happiest unwinding at home, rarely candidates for partying or long drinking sessions. In his early years at Hawthorne, nobody at Hawthorne realized that Zach avoided these environments due to childhood triggers, and it was not information Zach was eager to divulge. So he always felt like he was under the microscope at Hawthorne. So yeah, it started when Zach was pulled into a meeting with Clarkson, Fagan, and Jason Burt. Zach says that he was told that Kylie was holding him back from progressing his career, and that he needed to end the relationship to fulfill his potential. For Zach, this triggered an emotional outpouring. Feeling vulnerable and sobbing in front of his coaches, he says he revealed childhood traumas that had shaped his reserve and clean living persona. To this day, Zach feels ashamed and embarrassed that he had to justify the reasonable and well-intentioned choices that he was making. But they basically did the same thing to him that they did to Ian. So.
Yeah, I remember reading that and just thinking, because obviously they're denying, well, what they're saying is they didn't do any wrongdoing or didn't break any rules, is what they're saying. So they're not necessarily denying those things. I just thought, obviously, horrendous treatment of anybody, regardless of who they are.
Yes.
Horrendous. I'm trying to understand how they can justify basically saying your life doesn't matter.
Yes.
Because what was going on there is they were, all they cared about was winning. Winning the competitions, having, the best players. And I'm sure all coaches want that. They want to win. You've got to want that to make it happen, but not at expense of the player.
Oh, yeah.
I don't understand where they figured that was more important.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing by the stories you're telling me. And then they're saying, oh, they're not admitting to doing anything wrong. That's all wrong. They can't. And those people didn't make that stuff up.
No. Intimidation and bullying are always wrong, right? Even though it's hard to prove.
Yeah.
Because it's just influencing or, saying that you're not going to do well, or saying, although there were direct, you need to remove your SIM from your phone. But, it's still, and the pressure of it all makes it fall in line even more, I think.
I was trying, because I read the story, I think I read some of the stories similar on this topic. I was trying to understand where they're coming from. I mean, I like to play devil's advocate with this stuff. And the only thing I can liken it to or compare it to is like a parent with the children, who want the best for their children. And so will force you very forcefully, I don't know, they might confiscate your phone. They don't want you going to parties. They want you to study because they want you to have a great future. That's the only thing I can compare it to, like the kind of the caregiver. And because what I realized with this story was that they were very young. They're like 18, 19 year olds. They were really, really young. And the problem is, I would say even if they weren't First Nations people,
Mm.
they would have been treated the same had they not been. Had they been,
Mm.
you know, in relationships and getting pregnant and having children at that age,
Mm.
I think that's would probably be the case because these men doing these things only seem to only care about winning.
Yeah.
And then I think, well, why was it only the First Nations people being treated this way? Because that's what makes
Yeah.
it racism, right?
Yes.
And then they're
Exactly.
thinking, well, if you think about the other players at the same age, from a completely different culture, and maybe even private schools, educations,
Yes.
not nowhere near the same level playing field.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
they're very unlikely to be in those situations.
Yeah.
And so that would be why maybe, I don't know,
Mm.
there is no one that wasn't a First Nations player coming up
Yeah.
with these type of accusations. But then at the same time, you know, First Nations people, it's like a dream come true. It's a
Mm.
dream come true for anyone.
Mm.
But to even get to that position
Yeah.
is like 100 times harder than any of the other guys being
Exactly.
drafted in there.
Yeah.
So even get there, so you can see where they'd almost do anything.
Yeah. The pressure must have been.
To stay there.
Yeah. Intense.
The gratitude they would have felt,
Yeah.
privilege to be there, but then to be treated like that is just incredible.
Well, yeah, it was almost like they weren't treated like they were human,
Mm.
you know, because their needs and their families and whatever, those concerns were completely secondary or not at all present.
It's just unbelievable that you could get away with it because it's not like it happened yesterday, is it?
Exactly. No, it was years ago. And you know, some of the couples, they didn't make it through that whole, you know, ordeal. You know, some are together and they're trying to deal with it, but others are not. So it's a terrible story.
It's awful.
If they've done it, I think, and I'm sure, I mean, it sounds like they've done horrible things. Things need to change. Like it can't continue.
I'm assuming it's not the only club
Yes.
that's done this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
100%. Or even sporting agency that's done it either.
I could not. I mean, I could imagine people trying to isolate them, maybe to stop them from partying, to like worsen their career or something, if you know, because I imagine that's what they do. But that's not really what they were doing. Like they weren't doing that at all. Like they were trying to separate them from their families and their partners.
I think I read in there they wanted to live in especially when they had children, live near their family, so for the support. But they were in an area where they weren't in a good area.
Yes, exactly.
There's something about that.
Yeah. And I know one of them did move, like one of the partners moved to be closer to her, you know, and be supportive and things like that. And they made such a huge deal about her moving there, like it wasn't really possible. They really couldn't rent in Melbourne anyway, so
couldn't afford it. Well,
they couldn't afford it.
The club should have been paying for it then, really.
So no.
It's just a disgrace.
Yeah,
when you hear things like that.
It is a disgrace.
But for me, it's a disgrace because surely they're not the only people know about that going on. Like other players would have known.
Yes.
You know, there'd be so many other people aware of that kind of behavior. I just can't get over the fact that it's only coming out now.
Yeah. They should be ashamed.
Yeah, they should be ashamed. And I don't know how they could just blatantly deny it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if they're choosing their words carefully by saying they deny any wrongdoing versus thinking what they did wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or it probably wasn't wrong in the sense it didn't break any specific rules. I think that's what they're getting at legally. Then there needs to be rules. You shouldn't need rules to treat people so inhumanely. You shouldn't need rules for that.
I mean, that should be like we protect our players. That's what we do, right?
Yeah, there should be policies around, you know, relationship players in relationships and family life, and there should be like policies around that apply to everyone, whether you're 18 or I don't know. I guess the lifespan of a player, I don't know what it is. Are they old by the time they get to 30? I mean, I don't know when are they having kids and getting married, these players?
Exactly.
I don't know. I mean, if do they all get treated that way? I doubt it somehow. And there was the other point there about the player that didn't want to go out and drinking with his buddies because it triggered him.
Yeah.
And them saying you need to build team morale. They need to find other ways for the players to build morale other than getting pissed.
Exactly.
In a bar.
Surely there are other ways. I mean, we do it in a workplace all the time. It doesn't actually have to involve getting pissed all the time.
Yeah, you need to find another way. It doesn't involve alcohol for sure.
Yeah. Surely they can build a team without just...
It just feels like they're so back. They're so prehistoric almost.
Yeah. Very prehistoric. Oh, anyway, yes. Terrible story. Terrible.
Oh. And that only broke recently, and that's been investigated currently. And I hope it causes a change, because that's just maybe it starts a movement. I'm thinking not Me Too, something else.
Yeah, I know. It needs to. I think it needs to reshape the game.
Well, not even just that game, sports in general, because I hear it's pretty bad in sport.
Yeah, no, I hear the same thing. I mean, I get that people are passionate about sport and, winning and whatever else, but you can't do that at the expense of people. Like,
no,
it's terrible.
I don't even understand. Do you know what I don't understand though? I can't imagine any of those players or that happened to them being successful players, because the mental distress that would have put them under. I don't see how they could have been peak performance.
No.
Or really, it completely contradicted what I guess they were trying to do.
Yeah.
I just don't see how that would have worked.
Yeah. Because I think the second story, whichever one of the women who was separated from her partner, she had ended up having a miscarriage, I imagine, for all the stress, because she was trying to contact him and nobody was letting her do it. And she miscarried, and he only found out by just the coach just mentioning it, like on the field at one point. It was like, oh, by the way, she miscarried, but don't worry, she's fine. Like, oh my God, to tell someone that, like that.
I don't know. I just wonder, do these men have families and kids themselves? Like,
imagine they do.
How would they feel if that happened to them?
Exactly. Like, that's what I mean. It's like they didn't view the players as human.
And dehumanize them.
Yeah, exactly. Because how else would you be able to treat someone like that, right?
Yeah, I guess.
I think it's like a thing in your head that you say, oh no, they're different.
They're not like me.
They're not like me, exactly. I'm sure they do have families and have children and would be devastated if they had the same news.
I guess all those kinds of behavior, you have to dehumanize someone to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So, anyway, awful story. And that's why I wanted a nice story.
Yes, exactly.
To go with that, because that is awful. What's the point of sharing that? Is really just highlighting a systemic racism or racist behavior. And to me, if that's against a particular race because it's, First Nations people, but even if it was a different group of people, it's dehumanizing people.
Yeah.
Which is just not okay, no matter what.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be happening.
It shouldn't be happening in this day and age.
Exactly. Like
in this day and age, shouldn't be happening. Oh, shake it off. Shake it off.
Exactly.
Shake it off. It's awful. I hope we'd have to talk about the outcome of that when we get to that place.
I think it will be months before.
And I think those families are entitled to compensation. Not that it's going to help, not going to make up for any of the way they were treated at all. I think they're entitled to compensation.
Yeah.
Those men should never be working in those roles again.
Yes.
I don't see there's going to be any criminal proceedings unless somebody take, civil courts. They should not be in those positions. They really shouldn't. And there needs to be some sort of reforms. Well, let's see what actually happens, shall we?
Yes.
So that's our stories. So before we go, I have the feature, What Would You Do?
Oh, yes.
Where we share a scenario that highlights a form of bias. And we ask Meenal, what would you do? So this is, again, a scenario. Most of these are workplace. I will give you some others another time. But for now, we'll stick to the workplace kind of environment. So imagine your manager, who is a man, often meets with men on his team for dinner or drinks, building the relationships, yeah? But rarely meets with the women outside of work. What would you do?
I mean, I think it would be interesting if I was in. Well, if these men were anywhere interesting, I'd be like, yeah, maybe I'd want to go. If they weren't, which is likely, I'd be like,
you don't know that.
I won't hang out with them anyway. But I would ask him why he does that. Like, why do you only take out the men? Like, what's the go with? Why doesn't everybody get invited?
Yeah, that's a good question. And then I'd be just thinking, well, what if he says something like, oh, Jackie, she's got kids at home, so I just assume she wouldn't have time.
Yes. Actually, yeah. I mean, I reckon people say that all the time. Oh, they have to get home to the kids or whatever. It's like, well, maybe they want a break from the kids. Why don't you just ask them? Just invite them out and then they can say no.
But I've got a question though. It's interesting. What do you think could be the reasons that this manager would do that?
Well, I mean,
I've just given you one idea, but what could be other reasons?
I would think that he would think that, the women weren't worth developing, or, like his relationship with them or their relationship with the team wasn't as important. For whatever reason. Maybe the men, he assumes that the men achieve more or are, going to achieve more or going to end up being, I don't know, managers or something like that. Therefore, it's important for him to keep that relationship going.
Okay.
I wonder how much then that influences, the promotions and the, like opportunities within that workplace. Then, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what possible ideas he has around that behavior. But anyway, this is what it says. Friendships at work are valuable. We know that. And actually, I think in the age of working from home, there's nothing more obvious than this idea and concept of work, of those connections you have and friendships you have in your workplace, and how it's diminished by the working from home, or it can be. You have to put a lot of things in place to maintain that level of connection. So important relationships, relationship building, information sharing can happen over coffee or a pizza or drinks. But when people are routinely excluded from outings like these, they can miss out. And if it's a manager making arrangements, it's especially problematic. Part of their responsibility is to make sure the whole team has equal access to networking opportunities. Networking is critical, I think. And I'm thinking back to some of the social things we did in work.
Yes.
You talk about your personal life, social things. You talk about work a lot as well. And you would sometimes get really good exchange of ideas, see problems and things like that. So it's really valuable. And I take the point. I would actually take that point if a manager said, Janet's married, she's got kids, and she's often expressed that she doesn't want to be out in the evenings. I think that's perfectly reasonable for women and men to have that idea and feeling about themselves, that they may not want to be away from their family in the evening, and I think that's okay, then the manager needs to make another opportunity.
Yeah.
Whether it's in the day, whether it's the lunch, whether it's a breakfast, whether it's on a weekend, even though that might not be good either, but needs to make other opportunities so that people can be included.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good point. It ties into what we were talking about earlier. There's not one way to interact and build relationships, right?
Exactly.
Be more inclusive.
I know we were talking about traditionally around alcohol and dinner in the evenings because it's after work, but then you have to bring it into work so that it can be more inclusive. Exactly. What else does we say here? So this is your manager. So you have a standing to raise this with him. Say that you've noticed that he goes for drinks with men on the team more than the women, and explain why it matters. You can also offer solutions if he's uncomfortable going to dinner with women. Suggest that he meet everyone for breakfast or lunch. And then why it happens, it's because men might feel more comfortable in the presence of men, some men.
Yeah.
That's one of them. And it's an affinity bias. It's the same with some women. Some women may only feel comfortable in the presence of other women as opposed to men. You know, it's not a one-way thing, but you can see how it's problematic in the workplace. And this, so what we're highlighting here is affinity bias, where you're drawn to people like you and less drawn to people that are different from you, whether that's because they're a different sex or whatever, different. Affinity bias is huge. And that's why you need to have, that's why it's really useful to have, you know, checklists when you're interviewing. Because what tends to happen is people just, I like them. You like them.
Yeah.
Because there's something that it might be an affinity bias. Like that you're a kind of person, you're, you know, an affinity bias. So you need to have objective criteria that everybody follows when you're interviewing people, because you can fall into that trap, and it is a trap that we can all be guilty of in who we're friends with. And if you're affinity bias with who you're friends with, fine, you are limiting you're limiting the abundance of your friendships. But in the workplace, this is how we end up with just white men in management. So you need to be a bit more aware and a bit more objective about it. Where am I reading here? So, you know, he may be nervous for other reasons. Some men are wary of spending time with women colleagues outside of work for fear of seeming inappropriate. And that's a reasonable fear as well. But again, there's solutions to that. So I think it's opening the conversation as to why. That's why I was asking you, why would somebody do that? We didn't come up with the idea that some men might be uncomfortable with it being seen inappropriate.
Yeah.
You know, the old-fashioned sense that you've got some sort of romantic agenda.
Yeah.
If you're hanging out with the opposite sex. So I feel like these are reasonable fears that we need to address rather than judge, if people are open to having that conversation.
It's a good point about the not judging.
Yeah, because you don't know unless you ask. So, you know, like we make assumptions, oh, it's because of this, it's because of that. Just ask. You just noticed, like innocently, like you're genuinely curious. I think it's easy. You can have that headspace, or, you know, in your head, you're like, well, it could be this, it could be this. And the probably things you're thinking are probably really bad things, like the worst possible things. Or it could be something else, benefit of the doubt. What would be the ask? I love kids because they just ask questions.
Yeah.
Without thinking about any judgments.
Yes.
I love it. That's what the best thing. It's be a kid. Ask without judgment. And that's it. That's it. We just gave an example of affinity bias, what you can do about it.
Awesome.
There you go. Have you learned about a new type of bias, or are you already aware of affinity bias?
No, I was not aware of affinity bias, actually. It makes sense. I was particularly interested that, it might affect the interviews that you do.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah. That's why HR, like I remember developing when I was interviewing people, of a checklist of things that we wanted for this role.
Mm.
rightly or wrongly, we wanted, X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
And then assessing through the the CV and the questioning whether this person had them.
Mm.
And if I was getting, and I'll be honest, if I was getting a feeling as, oh, I don't know if I like this person, I had to be very objective and ask myself, well, what were the reasons? And whether that was good for the role or not. Because having different people is very good for a role. Like, me, I'm very big picture, vision, broad, and that can make me vague as well. And some people, so the complete opposite of me, which would be people I don't gel as well with, would be people that are so detailed, all the details, need to know all the details and give you all the details.
Yes.
Verbally as well. So to me, that would be a different person. So I could easily have affinity bias for people like me that can be visionary, concise, summarize things really easily, and not get to the point without giving all the detail. Yeah. But for this role, it might be more beneficial to have somebody that can really dig into the detail and give the detail. So that's what I mean. That's just an example of being really clear on what you need for the role. Do you need somebody that's direct, or do you need somebody that's so vague that can't get to the point? Or do you need somebody that's diplomatic, or do you need somebody that's direct and with respect? You got to think about what the qualities you want, and whether that candidates can give you that, or that's what you need. But anyway, affinity bias, interesting.
Yes, you've definitely given me something to think
about. So, what are you doing before we wrap up? What have you got on?
I haven't planned anything, but I want to, because I think it's a bit of a waste if I don't, but I'm not sure what I want to do. Have you got any plans?
I'm still celebrating my birthday. It's the festival of Tracy's birthday.
Awesome.
The whole month.
Yes.
So we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye. Bye.